All right, welcome to video 2 in a series of videos intended to help you grade 2 or 3 sample essays from the 2009 DBQ question. Just to review, this video is for essay 1A, and the question or the prompt is, from 1775 to 1830, many African Americans gained freedom from slavery, yet during the same period the institution of slavery expanded. Explain why both of these changes took place. Analyze the ways that both free African Americans and enslaved African Americans responded to the challenges confronting them. So the College Board is looking for you to show that you can explain change over time, yet also how things stayed the same. All right, so by virtue of the prompt, your answer must be complex and nuanced. And also, this last section here, analyze the ways that both free African Americans and enslaved African Americans responded to the challenges confronting them. This also requires you to provide free blacks, which is what we historically call free African Americans, and slaves, to give them what's called agency, meaning they were active participants in all of this. They didn't just accept their slavery. They didn't just accept the ill treatment. And they also, eventually, as you will see, didn't just accept freedom from Abe Lincoln. You know, they grabbed it, but we aren't there yet. But you will, like I said, you will be required to show that in this essay. Or rather, you will require the writer of the essay to show that, and you will assess, in part, how well they did show agency among African Americans. All right, so this is essay 1A, so please have that out if you are listening to this video or watching this video to better assess the essay or to help you assess the essay. I'm not going to read through the entire essay. I'll assume you already have. And again, remember, you can pause at any moment and read the paragraph. All right, so first I'm going to be talking about the introductory paragraph. So if you want to read it, do it right now. I'm going to move on. You press the pause button if need be. All right, so let's get started about looking at the introduction. And I know 5 seconds ago I promised I wouldn't read the entire essay. The introduction may be a little bit of an exception because it's setting up the whole essay. All right, so when the United States of America was created as an independent country at the end of the Revolutionary War against Great Britain, which I have crossed out here because I think it's extra words. Remember, economy of words here. Since it's capitalized, we know that it's the proper noun. It's America's Revolutionary War. We know who it's against. The roots of an entirely new American identity took hold. All right, so this is the author of the essay broadening the ramifications of this topic. Okay, talking about how we formed an identity through this. Though taking influence from its former parent country, the United States began its own system of representative government. Period. Furthermore, which I wrote as a good transitional phrase or word, the American identity shaped in the early years of 1775 to the 1830s, remember the date parameters, incorporated the ideals of agrarian farming, that's classical republicanism, which I've labeled right there, laissez-faire economic standpoint, that's the classic liberalism, and capitalism, which, as you guys and I know, that's more or less the same thing, laissez-faire economics and capitalism. At least pure capitalism is completely laissez-faire, classic liberal. All right, so religion, though not a primary influence on the government, also contributed to the shaping of this identity. While this largely benefited American citizens, another group in the United States was affected, he wrote where, or she wrote where, was affected in other ways. African slaves and their American-born children were ignored by the Constitution, which, in its original form, only referred to slaves as other persons. But the contradictory nature of the new American identity both led to greater freedom and more widespread bondage, and freedmen alike suffered under, exploited, and coped with the aspects of agrarian farming and agriculture, in general, capitalism and Christianity in America. All right, so I label that as the thesis. African slaves and their American-born children were ignored by the Constitution, which originally only referred to slaves as other persons, but it was contradictory. It led to greater freedom and more widespread bondage. It also broadens this to say that freedmen, free blacks, also suffered, and I changed this to were exploited by and coped with the aspects of classical liberalism and classical republicanism, which is what this person has here. Okay? So this thesis here, and you can argue this is also part of it, it does what was required. It gives African Americans agency. They were exploited by and coped with. That's an action right there. That's agency, coping with. All right. But this person also outlines the realms of suffering of African Americans, in which they increased bondage, yet also found niches of freedom. All right. So we have capitalism, which is classical liberalism, that helped in this increasing yet also decreasing of suffering. So we have capitalism, we have religion, and later on in the essay, which I think should have been mentioned in the introduction, also racism led to both increased and decreased suffering. So overall, I think this is a pretty good introduction. In the beginning, the writer broadens the context here, talks about us forming, or the United States forming an identity. Right here, I have this labeled forming the context of this, why it's important, why should we know this. I have this sentence here as kind of a transitional sentence. While this, I can see it labeled over here, while this largely benefited American citizens, another group in the United States was affected in other ways. All right, so it transitions from the context to one particular group. All right, the subject of this essay. All right, this writer also had, transitions here to help the reader along. That's why we use them, to explain to the reader that we're contrasting something here or we're adding to a list. Anytime you're unsure of what transition to use, you can look back to the writer's guide I gave you for help. All right, so let's move on to the next paragraph, the first body paragraph. But before we do, remember, the reader remembers more and learns more if he or she knows what to expect. And that's the job of the introduction. So now we know we should, in the rest of this essay, see things about religion, about capitalism, which, as you will see, this author does, or as you will read, this author does mention, or does analyze. So in this first body paragraph, the writer is basically outlining, in this era, the first opportunity for slaves and free blacks to gain greater freedom, yet at the same time, it was contradictory. They both gained and they lost. So this paragraph is about the American Revolution, which did just that, as we know, as we looked at in class. All right, so I've labeled as the topic sentence here, the American Revolution began the contradictory nature of the American identity as it applied to blacks. All right, so that is the topic sentence. And oftentimes, what writers sometimes do is they explain themselves in clearer terms, or they say it a second time just to make sure they drive the point home. So the author also says, the event that began the independence of the American personality also triggered the first opportunities for freedom and assimilation for black Americans. So those first two sentences are the claim, and the rest of the paragraph is supposed to be backing up this claim. And the first example the writer gives is Lord Dunmore's proclamation, which is Doc A, if you look on the DBQ. For example, in Virginia, let's move on to the next page, 1775, Lord Dunmore, British governor, declared that all slaves as well as indentured servants were free, provided they fight for the British, yada, yada, yada. So in condition, blacks fought for the opposite side. So that's both a way they gained freedom, but also the author of the document basically showed that he or she understood both the purpose and the context of this document by using it this way. The purpose being, he wanted support of slaves and indentured servants. The context being, it enhanced the freedom, theoretically at least, it enhanced the freedom of African Americans. Now, to further support, or to offer additional support for the claim that the revolution enhanced freedom in part, this author uses the Vermont example with Ethan Allen. And you may not know what that is, but that's okay. There's a lot of outside knowledge you could use But this is an example of this author using some outside knowledge, which I've labeled as okay, outside knowledge. So the author then moves on to use document B, another piece of evidence supporting Black participation in the Continental Army is shown in Paul Cuffey's petition, in which he notes that Black people helped the colonial cause despite their lack of protection and equality under the law. All right. So the author is showing that he understands the purpose and the author's perspective of this document, the way in which he used the document. So again, remember, it isn't like he said the author meant this. The purpose of the document was this. You're not summarizing the documents, you are using them as pieces of evidence. And this is evidence to support the claim that the revolution in part enhanced freedom of African Americans, both free and slave. Also, please note that when you write with confidence, your voice comes out, and I think this shows voice right here. It is significant to note, all right? When someone is using phrases, transitional phrases like that, that shows they're writing confidently. So it is significant to note that this occurred in Massachusetts, one of the states that would later proclaim slavery illegal in the emancipation or manumission trend that followed in the late 1780s and early 1790s. So the author is showing that he or she understands the context of Doc C, which is basically the map that shows that in between 1790 and 1830, the North got basically reduced their dependence on slavery, and the South gained dependence on slavery. And again, that's the context right there. It's also a very good piece of evidence that shows this contradictory thing. In the North, they gained freedom. In the South, they lost freedom. Slavery increased. Now, the author changes tone here somewhat and offers ample support that African Americans gained freedom during the Revolutionary era. But down here it changes and uses a transitional phrase here, however, which isn't my favorite one, but it works. However is a contrasting transitional phrase if you're showing contrast here. So this is to alert the reader that we are now moving into a different tone, and I will now be describing things or ways in which freedom was lost during this era. However, despite acting initially as a force for freedom, this war would eventually lead to the Constitution that would ignore slavery in southern states and the issue of Black enfranchisement. So that's kind of like a secondary topic sentence, a transitional sentence, moving this into the area that I just talked about, the ways in which freedom was limited. And this person is going to focus on the ways the Constitution did that, or should focus on that. So this author brings in some outside knowledge. In addition, the Constitution basically nullified the previous proclamation of 1763, which limited expansion. This expansion would be another factor affecting slaves. All right, now you don't know this, you don't know that yet because it's too early in the school year for you to have learned that yet, but you will know that. The important thing for you to remember is this is a very good sentence that offers a segue to the next paragraph. But before I do move on to the next paragraph, I should mention that one of the weaknesses of this essay we just finished. In that first body paragraph, the author should have spoken more about the North reducing their dependence on slavery. All right, so in this paragraph, you can see the topic sentence is the first sentence, which by the way was mentioned more in the introduction, expansion I'm talking about. As the early country grew, I should say, so did the desire for expansion. And as I said, expansion probably should have been mentioned in that thesis statement. All right, and the author brings in Doc C again. A factor affecting this is the importance of farming, and in parentheses, agriculture on American life. The country's first Secretary of State and later third President, Thomas Jefferson, heavily idealized the agrarian farmer, a small landowner who farmed to little profit. However, another type of farming occurred, plantation agriculture, and this person then goes on to talk about the spread of slavery, the decline of slavery in the North, the ubiquitousness of slavery, or the increase of slavery in the South, and brings in a whole slew of outside knowledge about this, and basically again talks about the contradictory nature of freedom in the North and slavery in the South. So as the country expands, slavery both declined up north and expanded down south. Now, admittedly, this paragraph would be better served with a better topic sentence. As the early country goes, so the desire for expansion does not explicitly or very clearly tell you or inform you what the paragraph is going to be about. Okay, it makes it sound like a little bit that this is a research paper about expansion. Something along the lines of more or less what I just said. As the country expanded, so did the contradictory nature of slavery, or something along those lines. Declined up north and expanded down south. But other than the weaker topic sentence, this author does a good job of first bringing in a document and outside knowledge, explaining why slavery declined up north, pretty good, and why it expanded down south via the plantation system. So moving on to the next paragraph, this is going to be the paragraph about capitalism. Now remember, I don't love how this author kept speaking about American identity, but the author did, in the introduction, talk about how the formation of our national identity led to these three things, one of them being capitalism, that helped both expand and decline or reduce slavery. So it does tie back to the actual thesis that our identity, formation of this identity, incorporated these realms of suffering for slaves, but also these realms where they could earn or did earn their own freedom or had greater freedoms. Okay, so right here would be the top of the topic sentence for this paragraph. Another significant aspect of American identity was capitalism, as described in Adam Smith's 1776 book, Wealth of Nations. Now, I think a better reference would have been Hamilton's Four Reports. I mean, in reality, Adam Smith's books, his book Wealth of Nations, wasn't well known to the Patriots at that time. It was 1776 it was published. They were rebelling by then. They had been rebelling for years. So I'm not in love with that outside knowledge there. Okay? So I would have preferred Hamilton's Four Reports. That was that's the birthplace of U.S. capitalism. So while Smith's book may be the Bible of capitalism, Hamilton's Four Reports is the origin of our capitalism. All right. So again, he mentions this, or she mentions this was again a contradictory factor, and then goes on to talk about ways in which capitalism declined and ways in which it helped increase their freedoms, which is the topic sentence. Supposedly that this capitalism did both, and underneath that, the author has evidence to back it up, and some outside knowledge, and also uses document F here. It led to the ability of slaves to earn their freedom through hard work, though hard won, as shown in Venture Smith's narrative of 1798. All right, so just by virtue of the way this author used the doc, showing that the author understands the purpose and the context of the document. Okay, now we move on to the section on religion and how religion both exacerbated slavery or made it worse, but also made it better. Increased freedom. So the author begins, the topic sentence would be the first sentence in the paragraph here. Protestantism became a big aspect of American culture through the First and Second Great Awakenings. Then he or she goes on to bring in some outside knowledge, how slaveholders used Christianity to basically try and create obedience among their slaves, and also to justify their ownership, as you would find in the Bible. And then, this is a contrasting transition here. However, I think is a little overused. It also, I don't think, should be in the beginning of a sentence. It belongs more in the middle. I would use the phrase "to be sure." It's a phrase I tend to overuse, but I think it goes here. To be sure, this, meaning Protestantism or the spread of religion, had a converse effect had a converse effect, and that's what I added to this. I changed this a little bit. Had a converse effect as the slaves, blending African traditions with Christianity, used religion as a unifying force of identity and a source of hope. And that would be the author using document G, which is simply a picture of the real name is a Negro Methodist meeting in Philadelphia. Okay. So that, again, that would be usage of document G. Moving on. The author goes on to bring in some outside knowledge as to how religion motivated slaves to rebel against religion, justified their rebellions, and so forth. So the evidence provided in the paragraph goes right back to the topic sentence. The topic sentence makes the claim that the spread of religion, or more specifically Protestantism, had both a positive and a negative effect on slavery, and then goes on to offer evidence of both. So again, by talking about this contradictory nature, you're taking both sides of this, and you're also adding complexity and nuance to your essay. And that brings us to the conclusion. And I actually think the topic sentence for the conclusion is better than the thesis. Overall, the American identity had very contradictory effects on Black Americans and slaves, and then goes on to list the realms of suffering, the expansion of land, as influenced by agriculture, forces of capitalism, and religion, all acted in this manner, and there should have been a period there. So the author is more explicit about the thesis in the conclusion. Then goes on to talk about racism, another cause of this reduction in freedom that was blatantly evident in both the North and the South. And he talks about how, and it's a little early for you guys to have learned this, that this racism was used to, quote, empower poor whites and continue the dominant wealthy white control. And mentioning this racism allows the author to bring in document H. Because even, I shouldn't say even many abolitionists, but early abolitionists, those before William Lloyd Garrison, who you will learn is around the 1830s, the early abolitionists were more colonizationists. They wanted to send free blacks back to Africa, largely in part due to they didn't feel freed blacks would get a fair shake, but they also were racist, especially by our standards. We watched a video in class that argued that New Englanders imagined once they freed the slaves, they'd magically disappear. So the colonization was doing that. It was sending them back to Africa. So again, bringing in the racism allowed the author to bring in document H, and the author ends actually quite strongly, gets that extra point there on the rubric. However, despite this uniform racism, meaning North and South racism, the contradictions, I don't know if that's in or of the American identity, revealed in this trend, foreshadowed the sectionalism of the antebellum period that will lead to the Civil War. And this is the author extending the thesis, getting that extra point, taking it beyond the antebellum era and taking it beyond the Revolutionary era and bringing it into the antebellum era and the eventual Civil War. All right, so now for my assessment on both of the rubrics. Again, this is Essay 1A. The author gets the point for the thesis. If I was allowed to give a half a point, maybe I would have. But again, if you look at the end of that introductory paragraph, the author mentions the contradictory nature of all these things and does mostly explicitly talk about farming, expansion, capitalism, and Christianity, which, remember, Protestantism is a Christian religion. So this person does get the point for the thesis. All right. Now, the next, section B, you can get anywhere from 1, 2, or 3 points. And the author does use, if you tally it up, it's 6 of the 7 documents. So that does count as all but 1. And the author does show knowledge of at least 1 or more of these things for each of the documents. So the author gets all 3 points. So far, 4 for 4. All right, now the second part of section B, to get the next point, you've got to use outside knowledge that support, not just knowledge you throw in there, but it's got to support your thesis. The thesis of this author was that it both expanded and declined slavery. The revolution did. And the person brought in a gobs of outside knowledge, so they easily get this point. All right. As far as contextualization, the author, or in its question, did the author accurately and explicitly connect historical events relevant to the argument to broader historical events and/or processes? And you remember that last sentence? You know, this led up to the antebellum era and the sectional conflicts. That's that point. Okay. Was the author able to synthesize all the documents and all the outside knowledge into a logical, coherent essay, an argument? Yes, the person was. So again, gets the point. Okay. And you've got to do one, to get that 7th point, you've got to do one of these 4 things. And it is I think, that this author did the first 3 things, did 3 of the 4, and so could have gotten the point in 3 of the 4 categories. Extend the thesis, which I think is very similar to category C here. This one I think is the one they were looking for the most in this essay, the contradictory nature of things. Okay, how you can do both things at the same time, both increase freedom and decline slavery. So this person gets that 7th point, and since it was not a perfect, how did that get smaller? Since it was not a perfect essay, I gave them a 99 out of 100, which is probably generous. They probably could have gotten more of a 97 out of 100. I guess I was more critical of it as I was reading it to you doing this video. Now looking at the 6 trait rubric, again this is essay 1A. The thesis was clear and focused. Maybe I could have put it down here. But again, this is using rubrics are somewhat subjective. This person accurately responded to the prompt, synthesized information from multiple sources, all or all but one of the docs, and does offer support and examples that enhance the reader's understanding. So even if I did put the thesis as a 5, this person still would have gotten a 6 in this category, as you can see from the bottom here. All right. And again, I like this rubric better because it takes in the actual writing more into account. It's less formulaic. So organization, all 6s, same thing. Thoughtful structure, guides you from point to point. The intros, set up discussion. Good transitions, therefore, however. Even some sentences were pretty good transitions that brought us from one paragraph to the next. All right, and reading it was easy. The design and structure supported our understanding of the topic. So again, this person gets 6 in ideas and 6 in organization. All right. Now, as far as sentence fluency goes, I didn't think that was 6 for sentence fluency. I thought it was more of a 5. All right. So got a 5 for the first category here. Sentence structure, clear and direct. Smooth phrasing enhances readability. Okay. And again, it's more of a subjective judgment call sometimes when you're going in between 5 and 6. Okay. The essay I thought did have purposeful beginnings and transitions that helped reader follow the text. Okay. And the sentences were varied and balanced. He or she didn't sound like Tarzan in this essay. He wrote with confidence. All right. Not all sentences were the same length. They didn't actually use the same words over and over again. All right. So this person, I gave a 5 in this category. All right. Again, it was somewhat of a judgment call here. I didn't think overall this person had a 6 for sentence fluency. Conventions are basically grammatical rules. All right. This person did correctly cite things in the DBQ. It was edited well. There were minor errors that were easily overlooked that you may have noticed. I just jotted down comments as I read it. The conventions, the rules of grammar support the meaning and the voice. And this is ready to publish with light touch-ups. So again, this person got a 5 for conventions. As far as voice goes, again, this is, like I've said previously, writing with confidence. It was professional, it was enthusiastic, confident, clear enthusiasm. And the reader feels eager to tell the story. So gets a 6. Did I have it there? Yeah, I have 6 right down there. And as far as word choice goes, again, gets a 6. The words were explicit and precise. They made the message consistently clear for the reader. Seemed very easily written. In other words, he didn't seem to be struggling to find words. The writer helped the reader feel at home with important terms and concepts, and language builds a bridge to understanding. Actually, the author did not get a 6 for this category, or at least this particular trait in the category. I didn't think all the words were precise and explicit. He could have chosen, or she could have chosen better words in certain instances, as you saw in my notes throughout the essay. Okay, so this person still gets a 6 for the category or the trait, because 3 out of the 4 things were in 6. All right, so what that would mean is the person gets a 34 out of a possible 36 and gets a 94. Okay, so the 6 trait rubric would give them a 94, whereas the 7 trait rubric would give them a 99, or as I said, it probably deserved a little bit lower, 97, 96. Okay, but again, I think this rubric is better because it takes the writing more into account. So I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next video.